Hello and welcome to my review of Monster Rancher 1 and 2 DX. All of the gameplay in this video was captured on a Nintendo Switch, but the game's also available for PC as well as Apple smartphones and tablets. The official release date is the 9th of December 2021, and I also need to let you know that a review code was provided to me by Koei Tecmo. So, what is Monster Rancher 1 and 2 DX all about? Well, as you can probably guess from the title, this package includes two games. These games are Monster Rancher 1 and Monster Rancher 2, which were both originally PlayStation 1 games from 1997 and 1999 respectively. And just for those of you that might not be aware, the DX part of the title stands for Deluxe. It's important to know that these two deluxe versions of the games are remasters and not full-on remakes. Both games are still presented in the original 4:3 aspect ratio, but the resolution and performance have been increased for modern systems. There's also been quite a few new additions to the games, including remastered music, 27 extra monsters, extra save slots, and more, which I'll talk about as we get into it. The main point of these games is to raise, train, and battle monsters. Besides a lot of minor details, both of the games are very similar and work near enough the same way. Most of the footage you're going to see is from the first game, but when I talk about the second game I will of course show footage from that as well. You play as a newly certified monster breeder, and your goal is to essentially raise and train strong monsters. You do this in order to win smaller battle tournaments that will increase your rancher grade. Increasing your grade will ultimately lead you to winning the Major 4, which are the 4 biggest and most important tournaments in the world. There is a bit more of a story that's told to you during the intro cutscene. However, during the game there isn't really much of a narrative outside of, you training your monsters and winning tournaments. There are a few events that occur, but generally it's all pretty straightforward in terms of the story. When you first start the game, you'll be assigned an assistant to help you on your ranch. In the first game she's called Holly, and in the second game she goes by the nickname of Colt. These assistants are there to give you all the information you need while you care for your monsters. Most of the time you can press a button which is displayed on the right hand side to get some helpful info on what to do, what certain stats mean, and how your monster's feeling. After meeting your assistant, you'll very quickly be given your first monster and you get a choice of 3. After making your choice, you take them back to your ranch, and then the training can begin. Every monster in the game has various stats that you can raise or lower through training. As you may imagine, the stats govern things like HP, attack power, and your chance to dodge your opponent's moves, along with other things. Most basic training takes place over the course of 1 week and causes that amount of time to pass in the game. Each year in the game is split into months and then into weeks. No event in the game can be completed over the course of a single day, and most events take 1 week or more to finish. So for example, let's say you want to train your monster's power stat in week 1 of a given month. You simply select the appropriate type of work from the menu, and if your monster's successful, the stat will increase, you'll gain some money, and the game will proceed to week 2. As I mentioned, there are some events and training that can take up to 1 whole month to complete. You can select a longer training session that lasts 4 weeks, which can sometimes allow your monster to master a new move or technique. Also, you'll sometimes be asked to accompany a character on an expedition to some ruins. While there, you'll choose your route and may be able to find some rare items. You do have to be careful though, as your monster can in fact get lost. They will eventually be found of course, but it can take a while and it will cost you some money as well. Not to mention the fact that your monsters can get injured, sick, or die of old age. Monsters in this game have an average lifespan of around 3 in-game years, but I actually had one who lasted to over 5 years old, so it does vary. And of course, when his time came, I did the only humane thing that I could, and I put him on ice before his death. Once you've raised a few strong, older monsters, you can head to the town menu and find services that will let you freeze them and then later on combine them to create even more powerful monsters. You can even find special items that you can incorporate into those combinations to create even rarer monsters. And so this leads us to another big part of the game, the combat. The tournaments that you enter have a rating attached to them which denotes its difficulty. During a month you'll notice minor tournaments that you can enter for prize money and items. There's also an official tournament that occurs on the last week of a month. The official tournaments are quite hard to win, but they will increase your grade if you manage to beat them, which then allows you to take on bigger competitions and so on. It's also worth noting that if you happen to be a grade C breeder for example, entering a grade D tournament will actually lower your monster's loyalty stat and lower its fame as well. During battle, you do have some player control over what happens, but probably not in the way you're thinking. When playing on the Nintendo Switch, for example, you need to press the L and the R buttons to move your monster left and right. Each move has a range associated with it, so the idea is to move the monster around with the shoulder buttons and then select the appropriate attack from the horizontal list at the bottom of the screen. If you happen to press the button when not at the correct range, the game will automatically use a move that is in range. Dodging an enemy attack is a simple matter of your speed stat. The higher it is, the more likely you are to dodge. but you do not have actual control over it during the battle. You'll also notice 2 sets of percentages and 2 sets of will numbers. The percentage number and the will number on the left are related to your monster. The percentage is the likelihood of your attack finding its target, and that will change based on which attack you want to use. The will number governs how many moves you can physically do. Will recovers on its own over time, and each move you perform costs a certain amount of will to use. In regards to new additions, this special collection includes content that was not present in the original Western release. These include additional save slots, freeze slots, Monster Hall of Fame slots, and as I mentioned earlier, 27 new monsters. There's also some new and reworked features such as training records, rankings for random battles, and a fast forward mode. Not only that, but one of the most unique designs from the original games has been reimagined. Back in the day, you used to be able to use real physical music CDs in your PlayStation 1 console with this game. You would basically insert any music CD when prompted, and the game would generate a monster for you based on which CD you used. This system has now been changed to allow players to search a database for a CD within the game and generate a monster based on some of your favorite music. And I will just say that the second game is very similar to the first, and from my experience, it's just a prettier version of the first one. There are of course some small details here and there that have been changed, but it's pretty much the same idea throughout. To give you a few examples, in the first game the training was presented in this small 2D video at the bottom of the screen, but in the second game it's shown as a full 3D animation. Another noticeable change is that a lot of the backgrounds are now rendered in 3D rather than being 2D pixel art. And with all that said, I think you get the idea by now, so let's move on to some personal opinions and we'll start with what I liked. Pretty much everything I'm going to say from here on out will apply broadly to both games, but honestly, I really found this game far more engaging than I thought I would. I actually never played them back on the PS1, but I did watch a bit of the anime from time to time. I think it was shown on a channel called Fox Kids over here in the UK, which I think eventually became Jetix, if I'm remembering correctly. I'd seen the games on store shelves and in magazines and things like that, so I knew of the game's existence, but I'd never actually played them. So I sort of jumped at the chance to try them out here, and while they do show their age, I found them to be really addictive. The game doesn't feature a world to walk around or realistically much more than a few different screens. You know, you have the town, the ranch, and the battle area, and that's kind of it. However, in this case, I think the simplicity works in its favor. I mean, yes, this is another niche title, but I would bet that the original games have a really dedicated fan base who absolutely love diving into all of the individual stats and raising the perfect monsters. Just like Pokemon players who obsess over the best IV stats and breeding strategies. I completely get the draw of a game like this, even though I think a lot of people won't. I don't think that many people will share my next opinion, but I actually like the dated look to the game. I quite like it when older games, especially PS1 or Sega Saturn games, are made to run at higher resolutions. Sure, the textures look very old and some of the geometry has that classic PlayStation wobble to it, but the edges and lines are just so crisp. I don't know how to explain it really, but I guess this is just how you remember old games in your mind when you think back on them with rose-tinted glasses or nostalgia. They didn't actually look this good, but you always kind of felt like they did. Most of the monster designs are pretty cool as well, and they are a bit basic, sure, but I think they do the job. And I suppose lastly, I really enjoyed the simple act of just raising my monsters. It feels and even looks a little bit like a Digimon World game to me, which actually is a game that I played for hundreds of hours on the PS1. It has that Tamagotchi or virtual pet gameplay that was just so popular in the 90s, and I always felt like I wanted to do just one more month of training before saving the game and going off to bed. I really did find it very hard to pull myself away from the grind, so to speak. And I guess that about does it for what I liked, so now let's talk about a few things I didn't like. So what is there to dislike here? Well, I mean, this is purely a monster raising and battling game. There is no big overarching narrative or plot to keep people invested. And I would bet that a lot of people probably wouldn't have the patience to keep going in a game like this. Of course, that's not to say that's a bad thing, some people just aren't built that way. And in all honesty, I can sometimes be like that myself. Sometimes I just want fast, quick gameplay, and that's not what this game is, not even in the combat. As I've already said, this is another niche game, and I suspect there's going to be millions of Switch owners out there who've never even heard of it, and they may look at it or buy it thinking it's going to be like Pokemon. Well, it isn't. It just isn't that at all. It'd be like having one Pokemon for a long time and only doing the IV training, breeding, or perhaps the battle tower. For some people that probably sounds great, but for the vast majority of players, it simply won't be. One thing I did find odd is that they clearly increased the resolution of the game and some of the HUD elements, but then they left some of the text in its original state. I mean, I know that intro movies from old games can be very tricky things to modernize, if it's even possible at all sometimes, but this stuff is just very hard to read in this case. It just doesn't look very nice, but at the end of the day this is a remaster with some new additions and not a full-on remake, so I think it's excusable. I guess I just found it a bit jarring sometimes because occasionally they mix the old low-res text with the new high-res text and it just looks really weird. It's a minor nitpick though, so I wouldn't worry about it. During some of the battles I found the combat to be a little bit frustrating. It's not that it's bad, and from the research I've done it actually works exactly the same way as it did in the old games, but some battles just felt impossible. I mean, I was grade D and I went into a grade D tournament only to get one shot by a monster. I also found it difficult to get into the right range for some of my moves, and the controls were a little bit awkward at first. Thing is though, most of this could just be down to me not raising the monster properly or not battling efficiently. I really don't know though, because I'm playing these games virtually blind and I have no prior knowledge of what's good and what's bad. In fact, if any of you out there have played the original games and know a lot about them, please do leave me a comment and let me know the basics of what I should be doing. I will of course do my own research, but I'd really like to get back into the game and raise even more monsters if I can. And lastly in this section I just wanted to mention how the game has a very slow pace. Not that that's a bad thing, but this is not the kind of game where you're on the edge of your seat all of the time. Everything you do has meaning and that's great, but there are a few moments where I caught myself wishing there was just a little bit more going on. Don't get me wrong, a lot of things do happen in the game, but they take a while to arrive. And I think that's about it for this section, so let's move on to the conclusion. In my opinion, Monster Rancher 1 and 2 DX is a faithful and well done remaster of a niche classic. It's certainly not for everyone, but for the right player, this package will give you hours upon hours of stat-based goodness. If IV training in Pokemon or raising Digimon is something you enjoy, then I would recommend that you give this one a look. Of course, if you're already a fan of the original PS1 games, then you probably already knew about this deluxe release and you most likely have it on pre-order. If that's you, then I think you're going to love this, I really do. I've done my research, as I always do, and this seems to be, from what I can tell, literally a one-for-one remaster but with some added features and updated visuals. I don't think you can really go wrong with it. For those of you that are on the fence, or perhaps you've seen this game around and know nothing about it is kinda difficult to recommend it. I'm not trying to disparage the game or anything like that, but it really does have a very limited market. Perhaps they're testing the water for interest in a new game. I mean, we did get 4 mainline Monster Rancher games plus a 5th game that kinda changed things up a bit, but that series basically ended in 2006, so who knows what's around the corner. Ultimately, this double pack is hard to recommend to a lot of people, but having said that, I still think it's a fun and engrossing monster raising simulator. If you're already a fan of the series or you have a strong interest in playing it, I can easily say it's worth your time and money. If you're only mildly interested or anything less than that, I'd suggest taking the time to do a little bit more research and learn exactly what you're getting into before you put down your hard-earned cash. And so there you go, that's my review of Monster Rancher 1 and 2 DX. It's available December 9th, 2021 on Nintendo Switch, PC and Apple smartphones and tablets via digital download. At the time of recording, there are no plans for a physical release, which is a shame, but of course that could change over time. If you enjoyed the video, I really hope you'll consider subscribing to the channel, and if you like what I do and want to offer your support, check out the first link in the video description down below. But with all that said, thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.